get started. So good morning to all our guests. Hi, Ken, long time no see. As you're entering the room, would you please share your name, your pronouns, your organizational affiliation, and what you would like to learn about family defense so it can help inform our presenters' presentations? Good morning, Brendan.
Good morning.
Good morning, Brian, Amy, Claire, Susan.
Good morning, everyone.
We're going to give it just a few more minutes. Thank you, Amy, for paving the way with your introduction. Does everyone see? We're asking for your name, pronouns, organizational affiliation, and at least one thing you'd like to learn about family defense. Good morning, Elizabeth, and welcome. We were talking about how we wanted to welcome you into the virtual space with a DJ as to set the tone, but so just imagine that we have a very lively DJ ushering us in with the spirit of community and openness. Good morning, 1925. If you have access to the chat, please share your identifiers in the chat.
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
I'm having problems, computer problems today, so I'm on the phone.
Well, who are you, 1925?
Susan Haley from the Dean and Margaret Lesher Foundation, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm sorry that I'm all goofed up.
That's okay. We welcome you, and thank you for identifying yourself.
Thank you.
Since it's 5 minutes after the starting time, I'm just going to go ahead and start. Oh, welcome, Jeremy and others. My name is Rakiba Brie. My pronouns are she, her. Many of you know me as the education program officer at the Evelyn and Walter Haas Jr. Fund. I'm actually also the co-chair of the board of East Bay Family Defenders, along with Marlene Sanchez, and it's with my EBFD hat that I welcome you all to this briefing, How Family Defense is Transforming Child Welfare. It's hosted both by our board and two foundations, Zellerbach Family Foundation and Casey Family Programs. For the agenda, I'm going to do a bit of a welcome and introduction, and then we're going to have a lineup of powerful speakers to really unpack what it is that we mean when we talk about family defense and highlight the interdisciplinary model that East Bay Family Defenders is advancing. So to give you a bit of background, East Bay Family Defenders' mission is really to keep families together and to minimize the time that children spend in foster care. In California, as many of you know, Child Protective Services removes, when they remove children from their homes, they have to file a case in juvenile dependency court within 2 days. Then at the first court appearance, parents have a right to appointed attorney if they cannot afford to hire private counsel. And in many situations, counties don't have a really deep bench of lawyers that can play this role. And so East Bay Family Defenders is innovating by creating that deep bench to provide free representation for parents in Alameda County in these cases. And so you may ask yourself, well, what is this model that EBFD is advancing? And more than being just quote unquote courthouse lawyers, family defenders wrap parents in the support of an interdisciplinary team where attorneys work alongside social workers and peer parent advocates who have lived through the system experience and reunified with their children. The interdisciplinary model has been emerging around the country and has been studied and evaluated formally in states like Washington and cities like New York. And so East Bay Family Defenders is really building on this evidence-based model to further develop the most effective characteristics of interdisciplinary family defense. Today, we want to share with you how this model plays out in practice. So I'm going to turn to our lineup of speakers. And first is an impressive woman and mother who has been on the staff of East Bay Family Defenders since its first day. Brie Colthurst is a senior defense parent advocate who came to East Bay Family Defenders with 8 years of prior experience as a parent advocate with the Child Welfare Agency. In addition to mentoring multiple parents at a time through their court cases, Brie co-facilitates a support group for parents called No Labels. And the goal is to empower parents to navigate the system and overcome their challenges and remain with their children, with their families intact. So on behalf of the East Bay Family Defenders, she is also, Brie is co-chair of the American Bar Association's Interdisciplinary Parent Representation Conference Steering Committee, that's a lot. And Brie also participates in Casey Family Program's Birth Parent Advisory Committee and was awarded Casey's Excellence for Children Award in 2020. And so just sending you lots of love and welcoming you into this virtual space. And so please take it away with your remarks, Brie. And with that, we can stop spotlighting me.
Thank you, Rakiba. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You guys can call me Brie. All my friends call me Brie. I'm inviting you guys to ask any questions once I start with my stories. I'm here today because of my experience, my lived experience. My son Love was born July 17th, 2008, which is my birthday and the anniversary of my father's death. Because I was born positive tox, which means with drugs in my system, and he's connected to me, he was as well. So I'm in the hospital, I wake up, and I have a caseworker sitting there holding my son. And I'm like on the defense, like, who are you? Put my son down. And she's explaining to me, she's like, calm down, I'm here to tell you about a meeting. That meeting was a team decision meeting, which is a meeting with a facilitator who is formerly a child welfare supervisor, the caseworker, the parents, and sometimes it's the next phase of the worker as well, who's in attendance. So I go to the meeting. The meeting was the next day. I go to the meeting, me and Dad, still first time in the system, have no clue what is about to go on in here, right? So I go into the meeting, I walk in the meeting, and all on a whiteboard is my whole information, my parents, my siblings, my older 2 sons that I raised, and everything about me being epileptic, me giving my children, my older 2 sons, to their father temporarily. So here comes the guilt, the shame, the embarrassment, all in one. I'm sitting down, they're telling me at the meeting that I need to go into an outpatient program. Because of my experience before, I recommended inpatient. The next carrying worker looks at me and says, yeah, right. Now, what if I wasn't determined? It is so easy for somebody to say, well, Brie, how can we help you? What does your family need? What got you here today? That would have been so helpful. You know, I come from a background, education is the key and a priority in our family. Father from Kingston, Jamaica, went to med school. Mother from down south, went to law school. I have 2 attorneys in my family. I have a sister, a teacher at Stanford. And then there was Brie, who was contracted with Cron, Channel 4, inputting commercials. But behind all that, I had trauma. I'm carrying with me what a lot of our parents are dealing with. They carrying that trauma with them. And if I would have had the resources and support out there, it would have been a different turnout. It could have been prevented. So I leave the meeting and I'm headed to home. I go pack. I want to go see my son before I go into this recovery program. It's residential. It's called Healthy Babies. And I get to the hospital, me and Dad get to the hospital, and the guard cuts my badge off and tells me I can't come see my son anymore because the agency has a hold on him. Not one time in this meeting did they explain that to me. You hear what I'm saying? Not one time did they say, no, you can't go see him. Oh, he's already in foster care, or explain the transition to me. But I knew this is where it got real for me. I wasn't gonna be that parent where I would have to, as we say, rent the baby, as we say, falling through the cracks. So fast forward, I went into the program. Within 6 months in the program, I lost my best friend, my mother. Sorry, guys. And I felt if that didn't steer me to a different direction, what will? That just gave me more courage, that encouraged me more to keep going. I was able to go to college. I enrolled back in college at Contra Costa, and I took up everything that had to do with social service. From there, I took psychology, sociology. I enrolled in parent leadership training program with the county and was hired on from there. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to come back and work in the county where my son was removed. During those court times, I was appointed an attorney, but I wasn't appointed a parent advocate. I didn't have anybody in those hallways sitting with me because we know how intimidating those hallways can be. wondering, sitting there by yourself, wondering what's behind those big old doors, and you see nothing but agencies back and forth. And here you are, especially by yourself with no support. You're lonely, you have no clue. It is so, so crucial to have a parent advocate in those hallways. And now we're on virtual, so just showing up in virtual court. When a parent says, hey, Brie, are you gonna be on there with me? That is so rewarding. That is so rewarding. So after being with the agency, I, for 8 years, I heard about East Bay Family Defender. Unbelievable, unbelievable, you guys. The first thing that caught my mind was, oh my God, they told me we were able to go to court. Because I wasn't able to go to court with the agency, that's what we need. That's what we need, to be in the courtroom. So I was like, oh my God, this is a dream come true. And to be working alongside with a social worker and attorney. That's unique. That's unbelievable. That's unheard of, is what I was saying. I love the work I do. This is my passion. I wouldn't change anything that I went through. That built me to who I am today. You know, I don't know if I could have navigated the system during a pandemic. It's hard, you guys. It is so hard. Trying to reunify, dealing with the racism, trying to get visits. It's hard to get a visit in with your children. You know, the substance abuse is at its all-time high, and then you're trying to find housing during a pandemic. You know, I say, I don't know if I would be here today if I had to reunify during these times. I work alongside Meredith. She's coming up next. Being on a team with people who are pro-parent, who are fighting for justice, is so rewarding. When a parent sees us and they say, oh my God, look at my pain. This is so powerful. This is where the trust comes in at. They're able to say, okay, well, I know you didn't walk the walk and you guys are under the same umbrella. I can trust you all. That's what they need to see. And they can feel it. A parent, we can feel it instantly, who's with us and who's against us. But here at East Bay Family Defenders, it's the reward prize for them. I love the work I do. With that, I'm gonna pass it on to my girl Meredith with the Bay team out here representing. Take it away, Meredith. Thank you, guys. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. You can put it in the chat. You can get my email. We could talk. However, I appreciate you for showing up today. Meredith, take it away, sis.
Thanks, Brie. Hi, everybody. I'm Meredith Wallace. I am an attorney at East Bay Family Defenders. Sabrina asked me to talk about a story that illustrated holistic defense and why it's important to outcomes. I did want to say, just to highlight from Brie's story, I think what's really important to understand about how people feel in this situation is her waking up with a caseworker holding her baby. I think that is almost everyone who experiences a removal has some moment like that, where a stranger is essentially holding their child away from them. When the children are older, the children are screaming, crying, asking for their parents. I think it should be clear, I assume, to anybody that it's a very dehumanizing system that really targets women, disproportionately Black families and recent immigrant families. And I think what's important for people to understand who don't have any familiarity with the child welfare system is that it is a regulatory system. I know it has the word welfare in it, but the purpose is to police parents with their children as the carrot and removal as the stick. So there's narratives that the caseworkers have. And again, just to really think about the caseworkers as police officers, which is not how they present themselves. But for example, the first caseworker that you get is called a dependency investigator, and they take over after emergency response. And so in the title of their job description is the truth. They're investigating you and trying to make decisions about whether or not you fit like a certain archetype who deserves their child, right? So in Brie's story, I think what's really important is to know that there is no social science at all that supports the idea that women recover better or children do better when removed from their parents in treatment. So if you do have issues with addiction, literally every study supports the idea that babies should be with their mothers, and that both will do better, and that any separation statistically leads to worse outcomes. But what I wanted to talk about, because I think it's easy to illustrate, is intimate partner violence in our system. And the story that I'm picking is a parent named Anna. It's a pretty normal story. What happens in most intimate partner violence situations is that CPS gets involved around the idea of whether or not the parent has appropriately used the criminal justice system to punish the other parent. So if you get, in this case, Anna had been with this partner for, I think, 3 months, and she had a toddler, and she was also pregnant. And in the situation, he got in a huge fight in front of other people. The police were called, he was arrested, she asked for an EPO. At one point, the EPO expires and the man calls her. She's a recent immigrant. I think she had just come from Central America. And the EPO expired, and he was calling her, telling her that he had rights and he is, paying for part of this apartment, and he needs to come back. And she has nobody to talk to about that. So when he comes back, I think basically the next day, someone has called in a report, social services arrives, separates her from her child because they believe she's violated an emergency protective order. I realize I said EPO, sorry guys, emergency protective order, the criminal version of the restraining order. And at that point, when they're removing her child, she speaks only Spanish, and it's pretty common. There aren't a lot of Spanish workers, and there aren't a lot of police who speak Spanish. So police show up, then they call a language line, and then they explain to you what they're doing through an interpreter on the language line who doesn't even specialize in CPS. It's just a Spanish interpreter who knows legal words. And in fact, in her interaction with the police, she's trying to say through the language line, like, what's happening? I don't understand. I'm going to die if you remove my child. And then the language line just cuts out. And then they call a whole other interpreter and start the process again. And then they end up 5150ing her, which means they put her on an involuntary psych hold. She has no mental health history. They just decided that she had, gone crazy through the second interpreter. And then it comes in as a case that's described as like a mental health case and an intimate partner violence case. And in what happened for interdisciplinary support, if you just have a lawyer, you have a high caseload, it's very hard to explain this system to anyone. Obviously, I'm running out of time and have just started this story, but it's very hard to explain how this works. Then also to explain it to somebody in a second language, also to make sure that they're having appropriate interpretation. I had another removal where they removed because they said the mother wouldn't file a restraining order, but they were asking her after she had been essentially punched in the face, and by literally the police arrived right after she was punched. She was wobbling and confused and had a concussion, and they decided she didn't want a restraining order. The next day when they came, after they'd already removed her 4-year-old, and the man was arrested. Often the person in the intimate partner violence who's the other parent or the boyfriend or some other person involved, it can be like an aunt, a grandma, it doesn't really matter to the caseworkers. They're often arrested. So the danger is definitely not immediate, just to sort of understand how that works. So in Anna's case, she needed to speak to someone else for basically a very lengthy amount of time to understand what was happening. And we used our social worker, Ariel Reisman, who just spent way more time with her and wasn't part of an investigatory body, which I think is what's really important, is to have people like Brie and Ariel involved who don't have anything to do with removing your child, and work in essence with your defense attorney who, and I always tell my clients I work for you, but I think there's just a huge difference between somebody who says they work for you and can spend like an hour on the phone and somebody who can call you or pick up the phone basically anytime. So at that point, Ariel began talking to her about ways to convince the social worker and frame things to the social worker. And I think they ended up changing the locks, which of course takes a little bit of time, and getting a restraining order, which for the agency, I don't really know how to explain the importance of the restraining order to the agency. We've had conversations where we talk about the ways in which criminal prosecution won't aid the family. And that's just a non-starter. The idea, the restraining order is, when I said there's archetypes, the caseworker looks to see if you did certain things. And if you do those things, then you're protective. And if you have some reason that those things would result in extremely negative consequences, that's not important to the caseworker, because you have to, a lot of times we have parents who get their children back, but end their cases with no jobs and no housing. Because at this point, they've participated in an extensive case plan in order to get their children back. And I can't go to a randomized drug test because I have a job is not an excuse for CPS. That's just because you're high, right? So I think one thing that's important about holistic defense is that it gives the parent a chance to understand like alternatives that we might be able to sell to CPS in order to keep, like, our goal, because we work with the parents, is to accomplish what they want to accomplish, but also to really listen to what they need to be not in a worse place when the case is over than when it started. Because I think that's overwhelmingly what happens for our clients.
Well, thank you, Meredith.
Thank you, Rakima. I had your face frozen so I could see.
I know, I'm so sorry that we have these narrow windows of time for you to share your experience, but it's because we want to allow time at the end for a really robust exchange. And thank you for those of you who are putting your questions and insights and sharing resources in the chat. Please continue to do so. And thank you so much, Brie, for sharing your story and trusting us with your story. I really felt that, and it's so good to see that you added in the chat that you were reunited with your son in 1 month. And is that love behind you on your? So it's really great to see the love and the joy there. I am going to, because I am forced to, keep us moving. And so next up on the agenda is Ms. Sabrina Alaguire, who is the External Executive Director at East Bay Family Defenders. She's going to speed walk us through relevant data and research that really underpins the family defense model that EBFD, or East Bay Family Defenders, is using. Sabrina has been practicing in family defense since law school at NYU and was part of the founding staff of Brooklyn Family Defense Practice, which is one of the flagship family defense organizations nationally. When she moved to California, she had her sights set on creating a West Coast version of the interdisciplinary model she had experienced and helped to construct firsthand. And so Sabrina is also the organizer of this affair and has helped to bring us all together and make sure we're prepared and on message. So thank you for that, Sabrina.
Thank you, Rakiba, and thank you everyone for attending this with us today. We are really eager to engage with you all. I see that some really potent questions have been dropped in the chat, and looking forward to tending to those and starting our discussion. So again, I will zip through some of this. We're going to provide this PowerPoint afterwards, so if there are pieces that you would like to spend more time with, you'll have those with you later. All right, so here we go. So let's start with the characteristics of most parents who end up with a case in juvenile dependency court. This slide displays data that we have gathered from our intake forms that we complete with new clients. So vulnerabilities include that 50% of the parents we serve have insecure housing, and 30% self-identify as living with a disability. 82% of the parents we represent are people of color. 15% speak Spanish as their primary language. 57% of our clients have been through the criminal legal system. And 15 of our clients at any time have an open case in criminal court at the same time that they are navigating the juvenile dependency court regarding their children. 77% of our clients have earned a high school diploma or GED. Well, and 47% of our clients have some college education. Next slide. At any one time, we are working with 1,150 parents. We close a bit under 700 clients' cases per year, and we get assigned over 700 new clients every year. Cases typically last at least a year and often longer. Our clients are parents of the 1,750 children in Alameda County who are under the supervision of the Juvenile Dependency Court. Of those children, 1,140 are in foster placements. The remaining 600 children are living at home under the monitoring of the Child Welfare Agency. Next slide. So how does this start? Most cases that enter the system do so through an initial report to the CPS hotline. And those calls can be made by anyone in the community. We're more familiar with calls being made by people who are categorized as mandated reporters. In 2019, there were 6,200 reports screened in by the Alameda County Child Protective Services Agency. Only 13% of those calls revealed any indicia of maltreatment of children. The substantiation rate, which you'll see there at the top right in green, varies greatly depending on the source of the report, which is the first column on the left. A quarter of all reports are from schools. The data shows, however, that schools have among the very lowest rate of substantiation of maltreatment in terms of the reports. Less than 5% of reports from schools have an indication of child maltreatment. So we're going to look now at patterns of what happens to children in the system depending on their race. As you can see from the dark blue bar, Black children make up 10% of Alameda County's child population in the first column on the left, but they make up 39% of all children who are taken into foster care. We see this disproportionality grow as children stay longer in the system, and especially when placed in group homes or aging out on their own. So how do we explain these hugely disproportionate numbers? There's a lot of explanations, but one major factor is the amount of discretion that agencies have about which children to remove and why. 70% of removals of children are due to alleged neglect. 16% of the cases involve removals of children in the most recent year involved alleged physical abuse, and 4% involved alleged sexual abuse. So we see family defense as a significant lever for mitigating and preventing these systemic harms. In a study in New York City, which compared our model to court-appointed solo practitioners, data showed that our model leads to children coming home significantly sooner and children being more likely to be placed with relatives in the alternative. Studies have also been done in Washington State, Colorado, and Oregon with similar results. And this is what we have built our model upon, and we're actively gathering data so that our organization can also be part of ongoing research. And we're doing that in collaboration with the American Bar Association's Family Justice Initiative, which is a coalition of parents' attorneys and children's attorneys working together to improve the standards of representation in this field and to also demonstrate the effect and outcome of these models of representation. So reducing the overuse of foster placements would save our government significant costs, which instead could be reinvested into preserving families and community-based supports. Fully funded family defense organizations in New York City and in Washington State have saved their respective communities tens of millions of dollars. So how is this going in California in terms of funding? The state funding model in California is premised on one attorney carrying a caseload of 141 clients. Even that high caseload is not being funded currently, as our budget for indigent defense in California only provides 76% of this state funding model. For context, national best practices, according to the American Bar Association, is for an attorney to have half of this caseload, which would be 70 clients maximum. So what have we been able to achieve thus far? Oh, I think somebody, is there a mute situation? I'm hearing feedback. Okay, I think we're good. So what have we been able to achieve thus far at East Bay Family Defenders? Through philanthropic support and other grant funding, we have been able to staff a very successful pilot of interdisciplinary support for our clients. We have maximized the impact of our one social worker and 2 parent advocates to currently reach 30% of our new clients. Oh, next slide. Sorry, Crystal, I haven't been saying next slide. I forgot. And this is what we are working toward: a caseload that matches national best practice standards and the availability of interdisciplinary support to all of our clients. And with that, I will turn it back to Rakiba.
Thank you, Sabrina, for that powerful overview. Now we're going to move on to 2 of our partners. First, I'm going to introduce Nicole Garay, who is with Casey Family Programs, where she is currently the Senior Director of the Bay Area Direct Service Office and a strategic consultant. She has extensive experience in child welfare services and served youth and families through Alameda County Department of Children and Family Services for 16 years before her current position with Casey Family Programs. And I'm also going to interview Amy Price, who's going to come into the space after Nicole. Amy Price, many of you hopefully know her, is a program executive at the Zellerbach Family Foundation. She manages Zellerbach's Improving Human Service Systems program, which supports advocacy, organizing, innovation, and strategic coalition building to promote a more equitable, effective, and community-driven approach to child and youth well-being in the San Francisco Bay Area. So first to Nicole.
Thank you so much, Rakiba. Appreciate that. It's nice to be in community with all of you this morning. I'll share a few words about why Casey has been in partnership with East Bay Family Defenders for quite a few years now, and tie it into the data that we just went over this morning. So at Casey, We continue to learn more about, and what was highlighted through the data this morning and through the pandemic, the deep-seated racial inequities that exist in many systems, including what we know about disproportionality and disparity for Black and Indigenous people in the child welfare system. And what we've seen, and hopefully resonates for you, is that every human has an inherent need to connect to other humans, especially children to their families, who they look to for safety and a sense of belonging. And Casey has invested in our time, energy, support to East Bay Family Defenders because of the alignment to the values of anti-racism and innovation, and Casey's mission to provide, improve, and ultimately prevent the need for foster care. The East Bay Family Defenders, sorry, I'm a little nervous. The East Bay Family Defenders interdisciplinary model that is rooted in a trauma-informed approach supports parents with their own self-agency to navigate the system, to advocate for themselves and their children, and to identify the supports that will help them and their family to heal from harm. One of the significant benefits of the East Bay model is the goal of reunification as the primary focus for permanency, and the acceleration of children returning home instead of experiencing recurring trauma in the foster care system. And as my colleague Toya Randall, who is here with us today, referenced in one of our planning sessions, what East Bay is doing through this model is recentering humanity. At the end of the day, we know the well-being of families is the path toward healing, whether it be from maltreatment by a caregiver, historical racial trauma, or system oppression. What may be the path to transforming a system or a society is our ability to connect with one another as humans. And there is nothing more precious to a child than the love, acceptance, and praise of their parents. And this message, which I'll end with, which was shared by Kimberly Mays, a parent advocate and social worker for Washington State, and is a peer leader with Brie on the Casey Birth Parent Advisory Committee, is don't save me from my parents, save my parents for me. And this was shared by Kimberly's youngest daughter, who asked her to share it with other system leaders and people who are inspired to change the system. So I'll say it one more time because I think that it does summarize what we see in East Bay Family Defenders as really the path towards healing. Don't save me from my parents, save my parents for me. And with that, I will turn it over to Amy.
Thanks, Nicole, and Brie and Meredith and Sabrina and Rakiba and everybody. I feel like, so now the garbage truck is coming to collect right outside my window, just as I unmuted. But I feel like I get to be the closing cheerleader for East Bay Family Defenders, and I don't feel like I need to say anything else to convince anyone that this is the way that we should be supporting families. So I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit more about why Zellerback initially invested in this and why we continue to, and why we hope to have other partners joining us in this journey. We gave an initial grant to East Bay Family Defenders before it was even really East Bay Family Defenders, I think, at the end of 2017. And Eliza and Sabrina were meeting in, the conference room back when we could meet in conference rooms at the public defender's office. And they had this model and they weren't sure where it was going to live or how it was going to live, but they knew that it was the right thing to do and it needed to happen. And so we gave them basically a planning grant to figure out how to develop the Alameda County version of this model that evidence already supported. And as has been said over and over, today to really give voice and choice to parents through not only multidisciplinary representation, but also through partners with other organizations in the community to help families address the collateral, criminal, and civil legal issues that families so frequently face and have to face alone without coordination, and often when systems are in conflict with each other. So the first year of funding was for them to establish, to secure the state contract to support the work, to build and train a staff, to establish its 501c3, and to open its doors in less than a year, which it did brilliantly. They did brilliantly. Then 2019 was really to iterate and to figure out, okay, we suddenly on day one had how many, 1,200, 1,400 cases that they were serving, and trying to figure it out sort of as they went, despite extensive planning. And so that first full year was really to iron out the kinks, and then to figure out a new billing mechanism when the feds gave approval for 4E funding, which supports foster care, to be used for family defense. And so that was like an entirely additional full-time job for Eliza and Sabrina to figure out that billing. And then just as they were getting into all of this and getting into the rhythm, COVID hit and threw everything upside down. And so this organization is still really young, and what they have done and the way that they have done it, the integrity and humility and humanity that they have brought to this work, and their willingness to iterate constantly and constantly look at ways to improve and to do the work better. And I saw there was a question in the chat, which I'll let Eliza and Sabrina respond to, about what is an external executive director, and that came as part of the iterative process. So while we initially invested in this for development, it's still developing, and we believe that this is the model that should be standard practice. And to the point I think Jeremy made in the chat, why can't this happen earlier in the process? Ideally, it should. And I believe that East Bay Family Defenders can make that happen with sufficient support. And as we've also heard, the state contract doesn't even sufficiently fund enough attorneys to meet the national standard model, let alone the social workers and the parent partners and advocates that are so critical to this model. So we are remaining committed to this work until the state catches on, the feds catch on that this should be the standard model and needs to be fully funded. So until that happens, I feel like philanthropy needs to step in to support that and fill the gaps and continue to advance this model and stick with the organization as they continue to learn together and in partnership. So I will leave it at that. And I think I'm turning it back to Rakiba for discussion.
Thank you, Amy, for that early investment of support and for being a powerful thought partner as well in the development of the organization. And thank you, Nicole, for your support and your analysis as well. I see that the chat has gotten active and some of the questions have been answered, but one thing that Jeremy just asked was, what other innovations would you all want to borrow from other organizations that are innovating in this space? How might you continue to build out the model? Sabrina or Eliza or Meredith or Brie?
I'll speak about that initially and would love those guys to chime in as well. So one area is actually to do much more collaborative advocacy with colleagues who are public defenders in the criminal legal system. So as you can see, I mean, the majority of our clients have also been criminal legal system involved. A very significant portion of that 15% currently are litigating their own criminal court case. And many more are dealing with issues around reentry, probation, parole, things like that. So, and also just the challenges of trying to parent while being incarcerated. Those folks are not necessarily even included in that 15% because their criminal case may have already been resolved. So we would love to be able to fund that in a co-located and integrated manner like Bronx Defenders has, and Brooklyn Defense has also built that as well, and Center for Family Representation in New York, which are really the flagship family defense organizations.
Thank you. And before I go back to the chat, does anyone want to unmute and share their question with the group? Ken, you had a question about defunding the police.
Well, yeah, it's obviously everyone knows all about that. And it just struck me that when Meredith was describing what happened to some of the clients, that if the response had been different from the very beginning, it might have led to a better outcome for all concerned.
I think I was just going to address, Kenneth, your question from the chat. When there were a lot of calls about abolishing the police, or I guess defunding, a lot of people would say, oh, we should send social workers. So what I was trying to say is that that is not necessarily a solution. The issue is systemic racism for historical reasons and individual racism because social workers have an extreme amount of discretion. So I think it actually would need to be a systemic change of the social services agency into something that prioritized keeping children and families together. So, for example, if you're removed, they give tons of money to foster families to raise your kids, essentially. And often family placements are denied either because of old criminal histories or because they don't find the living situation suitable. So yeah, I guess I would say, yes, it would be much better if they didn't send police, but the caseworkers kind of are police.
Any other questions that folks have? One question, Sabrina, that Nancy asked in the chat was about the insecure housing statistics that you shared. Was that pre-COVID?
That has stayed, I'd have to look back at the comparison and I can follow up about I haven't looked recently at that, or I haven't looked at that comparison. I will. I think Brendan was also trying to chime in. So
Yeah, I was trying to wait
lob
for
it back
the
to
appropriate
him.
time, because if you give me the mic, I'll just dominate the conversation. And I don't want to do that today. But as you know, may not know, I've been kind of with this since the beginning. And I think it's probably important to give the public defender perspective a little bit. I've been practicing, God, I hate to say how long now. I want to invent a Zoom filter to make me look younger, but I've been practicing for like 26 years now and in criminal defense. And I will be the first to admit there were multiple blind spots as a practitioner. We weren't paying attention to immigration. We weren't hiring social workers. And this field right here, family defense, was a definite blind spot to a lot of defenders. And what got me involved was actually working with the Bronx Defenders and then getting an email from Robin Steinberg back in like January of 2016, doing an introduction between Sabrina and Eliza. And kind of when I met with them, they completely opened my mind to the inherent systemic racism that exists in the system that I just was not aware of. And we all focus a lot on systemic racism that exists in the criminal legal system, not justice system, legal system, because it's kind of there, it's in your face, you see it constantly. And this one kind of rides under the surface and you don't really pay attention to it. And I keep thinking about my upbringing. Brie, I didn't know you're from Kingston. I'm Jamaica also, I didn't know that. Big up, right? I think about how I was raised and what my Jamaican grandma did and her upbringing. And if one person would have called the police, the chances of me being here in this position right now, very, very slim, very, very slim. And so I just can't really express enough the work that they're doing and how I'm just honored to be here and honored to be on the board now. And yes, I want to create a system that's more like the Bronx Defenders, where we are co-located, we're working together, clients come in, and we're able to make referrals immediately in real time. So boom, boom, we're getting services right away. And I can't stress the importance of having really fierce advocates in this field also. I see this work, whether you're a public defender, immigration attorney, being really systems work where you're deconstructing or attacking racism and also attacking poverty, because these systems are built on both, and they continue to exploit people of color because of both. So if we can attack both in the same way, the results are would be phenomenal. And I can talk more, but I want to open it up. I don't want to dominate. I know you give the mic to a lawyer, they keep going and going. But and I'm just happy to be here, and I'm so honored. And I keep thinking back into our conference room when there's like 5 of us talking about how this is going to get up and going. And now it's like, boom, it's like here and it's everywhere and it's in our county. So I'm really honored and proud.
And for those of you who don't know, Brendan Woods is the Alameda County Public Defender, and he's also on the board of East Bay Family Defenders. And so we are trying to nurture those connections with that kind of placement. And now Sabrina wants to follow on.
Yes, but then I really would love to hear from other voices in the room. I just wanted to also say that an area where we would love to develop is also in having more of an integrated collaborative approach with other civil legal services providers, so that we can make sure that clients are getting all of the needs that they have around housing stability, barriers to public housing, and things like that, as well as supplemental security income, other benefits, employment issues. So that's another area where other organizations that have been around much longer than us in New York City have been able to do that. And we would love to be able to introduce those supports, as well as a more integrated approach with immigration assistance and representation. So there's a lot of potential. Obviously, we're trying to just really build our core program and make sure that our foundation is strong with our practice areas. And yet we do see how much more we could, with integrated advocacy, be really helping to alleviate the symptoms of poverty and institutional racism for the parents that we serve. One other piece I really want to lift up is that from the beginning, we have also had close mentorship and advising from the clinicians who run the early intervention program at Children's Hospital. Barbara Ivins in particular, who we initially met through the Bay Area Children of Incarcerated Parents Partnership. And then Barbara happened to have her office literally across the hallway from where Brendan had given free office space to Eliza and me to start the incubation period of our organization. So we basically stalked Barbara Ivins because we loved her and worshiped her, and she became our friend. And maybe that's not funny. Anyway, we wooed her to be our friend, and she has now been a very close advisor to us. And so she does clinical, she and her colleague provide the, maybe Eliza, you want to talk about this real quick? They provide clinical consultation for parent advocates.
Yes, I will jump in.
Great.
So it was really, there's been so much synchronicity, I think, to this evolution of EBFD from the beginning. And there are too many points of sort of like connection from the universe to describe. Brendan, Brendan's connection through Robin being a really important one. And sitting in that first conference room was Nancy Wilczek and Amy Price, and also Dana Blackwell from Casey Family Programs, who's not here today. But also, I just want to pick up on the Barbara Ivins from Children's Hospital, who we had met through the Alameda County Children of Incarcerated Parents Partnership initially, when they had done some work on a jail study. And there were just a lot of, there was a lot of interest from Children's about really bringing an early childhood lens to the work that we're doing, and thinking about how, we don't assume that a parent and child has to be separated for an intervention to occur, and they don't either. Like that all of early childhood sort of focuses on keeping kids with parents. So that was a great connection. And the other thing I just want to, I don't know if, I think it's really come through, but for me, I come from a civil legal services background initially. And I think one of the things that was really powerful to me about being introduced to holistic defense is that it is an anti-poverty strategy as much as it is an anti-racism strategy. And that's what motivates me every day.
Thank you, Eliza and Sabrina. And can has a question, I guess it follows up on what Nancy said about what kind of changes have you seen since the advent of the pandemic? Have you seen an increase or decrease in the number of calls? How has the pandemic also affected your ability to do what you do?
So I'll first speak to the numbers and calls. I just looked up that data when I saw Ken's question. So there were 2,000 fewer calls screened in during the pandemic. And, you know, there's been attention in the media about whether or not, without the watchful eye of schools, that there would not be as many calls. I think there's also been some really, and at the same time, what we see, and I've forwarded some of the articles on the, we shared some of the articles on this very issue. We do see that, again, while there's a high number of reports that usually come from schools, that those by and large are typically unfounded. And the research into that has shown that educators will often call CPS or child welfare thinking that that's a good way to get families services when there may be issues which are often stemming from poverty, that the family needs support around. Teachers don't by and large mean for children to get taken into foster care. What we see though is that that's actually a really non-responsive way for schools to try to get support for families, because the child welfare agency is trained to be looking for safety risk and assessment of danger to children. And so I think that is part of why there's such a low substantiation rate from schools. So I would, you know, one could reasonably conclude that the 2,000 fewer calls this past year were because schools were not necessarily making as many calls. There are some articles about how especially Black and brown mothers have felt relieved in this past year, that their parenting hasn't been so scrutinized when they've struggled, but their children have been safe. So it's it's an interesting area to look at. And we could have much longer discussion about all of that. But in terms of how the pandemic has affected the parents and families we serve, it has been really, really devastating. I mean, when children have been removed from their parents during the pandemic, they have often not been able to see their parents in person for months, and for some families up to a year, that they've had to deal with not being able to be with each other. And visits have been on Zoom, including with infants. So it's been very devastating.
And not to put Brie on the spot, but I was wondering, Brie, you talked about trying to imagine how challenging it would be to seek reunification during a pandemic. Brie, do you have any other thoughts to share on what you've seen or how your work has changed in responding to parent needs during the pandemic?
Ooh, this is going to be a part 2 and 3 to this discussion. So for me, being a parent who's navigated, I needed handheld. I needed someone to hold my hand literally while navigating this system. You can't give somebody a piece of paper or tell them to show up on a screen and think everything's okay and they're cured. You know, I needed to be in those recovery rooms, getting the resources, getting the advocates, getting the comfort zone that I need to be in. Those walls are so crucial for parents to be in and get that support from one another, to feel that, you know what, I got you. I'm holding your hand. We're doing this together. You know, it's a difference. I couldn't wait, me myself, to get the vaccine so I'll be able to go back in the field and be at those programs, encouraging these parents, showing up in virtual court, just showing my face. I don't even have to say anything. When a parent knows that I'm there with them, it relieves their anxiety, de-escalates so much. They need that. They need to feel that support from us. We're the village. A lot of them don't have family. A lot of them are so into their addiction where they don't know which way to go. Who do I turn to? I'm like, here, come on, I got you. Let's do this. You know, and then having with the interdisciplinary, when I say, oh, here, hold on, let me call your attorney. And we're here collaborating together, trying to see how to best fit for you. Asking them, not telling them, here, do this, do this, do this. Ask them, what do you need from us? What do you need from me? What direction should we go in? How can I help you today?
Thank you. That is so powerful. And as you all have indicated, what you're doing actually serves to promote child and family well-being, produces better outcomes. And so can you tell us a little bit more about how your model promotes child well-being and how you make the case for it to the powers that be to begin to scale up your work and to persuade other jurisdictions that they need to have this kind of family defense work built into their approach? Meredith, are you leaning forward?
I guess I am now, Rakiba. I think I would say that one of the big issues with the system is that it's very hard to sell to the judges and the social services agency the amount of trauma that goes into removal, even though that's very well documented in social science and in other jurisdictions. So I think one of the things that we've done with holistic support is really try to frame that narrative for the courts and for the social service agency. Limited success with the social service agency, obviously, because they are, it's very hard to convince players in a system who have built their entire careers under the idea that removing children from their parents is going to be better for the parents and the children in some long run, that in fact, that's maybe not the best practice and is not helping. And I, like on an individual level, I would also say that basically everything stems from shifting the narrative around removal as a safe practice. And the way that it affects especially younger children, but all other children. Not sure if that answered the question.
Yes, that's great. Does anyone else? Thank you, Meredith. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Rakiba, can I say one other thing? Just to Ken's question before, I think people were really focused on calls, but I think we had about the same amount of petitions, which to me is part of what people need to understand about how this works as a discretionary, because we had a bunch of family law cases that I've never seen before, like very low level cases where they remove from one parent and give to the other. And then you have a big trial over jurisdiction because they're so low level. So what happens is the social worker's discretion means if they're not seeing some of the other cases, they start to focus more on things that wouldn't have warranted a petition before. So I don't think that our rates actually went down based on the number of calls.
Thank you. We're nearing the end of our time together, so I want to allow any of you who have tuned in to learn more about this model to ask any last burning questions you have. And hearing none, are there any final comments that any of our speakers want to make? Brie or Amy or Nicole? And hearing none. Oh, okay. Well, as Sabrina alluded to, we did send out a care package of information, and we can put our insights in the chat. That is a question that's coming my way, and I'm not totally clear on that. So would you like to clarify?
Sure, thank you. I was just wondering if people could just put in closing in the chat something new that you learned today, or a question that has come up for you, or something you're sitting with, or an insight. Basically, it would be nice to just hear from each of you kind of where you are at this point.
Thank
you again so much for being with us for this. This is our first go around at something like this.
Yes, thank you profoundly on behalf of East Bay Family Defenders for sharing your time, for sharing your insights, for sharing this space, for holding all that we've shared. Thank you, Brie, for telling your story. Thank you, Meredith, for sharing your story as well. Thank you, Brie, for sharing your expertise. And thank you to Eliza and Sabrina for your leadership of this organization, for stepping out there on faith in many ways and creating this organization where none had gone before. And thank you, of course, to our support from Annie Casey Programs and Zellerbach. We will, and thank you to NCG and Crystal for creating this platform for us to talk about the really powerful work that East Bay Family Defenders is doing. We would like to continue the conversation. Sabrina is going to include her contact information in the chat. We are also going to send out a care package with materials, and we will provide slides to all of you. Please, we are a lean, scrappy organization, a startup, and so we would be very welcome. We would welcome your ambassadorship to go out and spread the word about the work that we're trying to do, kind of railing against a system that has disproportionately harmed people of color and low-income communities. It's also been referred to as the new Jane Crow, given its disproportionate impact on Black women. And so we really think the time is ripe for innovative, weaving that web of holistic supports that that begins to work against the criminalization and the stigmatization of parents of color. And so with that, again, profound thanks to our speakers for their wisdom, and profound thanks to all of you for staying on this call for a good while. If you have questions, you can look us up online. And with that, I will close.